Okay, so we are live and we're about to watch another episode of Batman the Animated Series. And this one is Appointment in Crime Alley. So, I believe this is another one that doesn't have any of the supervillains in it. But let's not get too hasty about it. I can't imagine this is an episode I rewatched a lot either, because I don't remember it. And I'm sure as I'm watching it, it'll come back to me as like, oh yeah, this is the one with where this happens and this guy. And I'm pretty sure Leslie Tompkins has a big part in this episode. I think this is probably the first episode that she had a big part in. Before we get started, let me show off some things. Here's the 12-inch Asbats figure I've been working on, and I think this turned out really well. Remember the unboxing I did with the Bat Cycle and the two different Robert Pattinson Batman figures that I just did not give a crap about? Well, here's what I did with one of them, and he turned out pretty cool. Maybe I'll do the red version with the second one. Who knows? So, but yeah, I 3D printed the head and the armor. Found those on Cults 3D. They were made for like a 7-inch scale figure, I think, so I had to scale them up a little bit. And worked out pretty well. And then the other one I'm working on right now is Two-Face. This is, of course, going to be the Batman Forever version of Two-Face. Head's pretty much done. So I think he turned out pretty well. And you might be asking, why would you do the Tommy Lee Jones version of Two-Face of all the versions of Two-Face you could have done? Well, it's because I already had a file for a Tommy Lee Jones Two-Face head, and I wanted to do something with it. And I figured, hey, why not do a 12-inch figure of it? Like, I've been waiting so long for them to do a 12-inch figure of Two-Face. Between Mattel and Spin Master, nobody's gotten around to it yet. One of Batman's best villains, and you guys are just sitting on him. So I'll make my own Two-Face. How do you like them apples? All right, so let's, now the boom. Barely nudged up against Asbats and knocked him over. I knew that Pattinson was a weak sauce Batman, but I didn't think he was that weak of a Batman. Oh, that's the best part. I also made an unmasked head. So I got some use out of a Robert Pattinson head for an unmasked Jean-Paul Valley. I think he works a lot better for that than he did for supposedly Bruce Wayne. So. But anyway, let's go ahead and start the episode, shall we? I've got it queued up to go on HBO Just Max. You can watch along with your DVD, your Blu-ray, or whatever kind of digital platform you want, if you like. So, all right, let's get started. There's going to be some surprises with this episode since, like I said, I don't remember too much about it. But I definitely remember a lot about this intro because I've seen this so many times. Bruce Timm likes drawing them big lantern jaws, that Dick Tracy sort of look. I'm pretty sure Dick Tracy would have been a big influence on the way that he draws Bruce Wayne. He's got like that same sort of sharp jaw and that kind of squared off nose. Come to think of it, in the later seasons, when we get into the new Batman Adventures, Bruce wears a black suit with a red tie, which is what Dick Tracy usually wore, only he had like, the yellow trench coat and fedora over it. But Dick Tracy was a big influence on Batman in general. Appointment in Crime Alley, written by Jerry Conway, who, very famous comic book writer, created The Punisher, killed off Gwen Stacy, directed by Boyd Kirkland. Okay, yeah, I remember what this one is now. This is one where, like, Daggett's blowing up a bunch of, like, slums and things like that so he can clear the way for Delta City or whatever he calls it. They call it Delta City in RoboCop. It's basically the same thing. Yeah, this was a good one. Even though it doesn't have... Oh, look at that evil expression on his face. Nitro. So I guess I was wrong that it didn't have a comic book villain. It does have a comic book villain, only it's a comic book villain from Spider-Man, because this guy's clearly Norman Osborn. I mean, look at him. He looks like Norman Osborn. He basically is. If Norman Osborn didn't become the Green Goblin and just stayed a sleazy businessman. Some good animation on Bruce as he's exercising. Looks very Ben Affleck. All this stuff is from the comics. Everything has gone downhill in the Park Row area since the Waynes were killed there. And you can see he just put a sign over it, but there's where Leslie Tompkins made her first appearance in this series. And she's an important character from the comics. She usually doesn't get adapted into much media because, like, usually the stuff you associate with Leslie Tompkins gets divvied up between Alfred and Commissioner Gordon in the movies. It was Leslie Tompkins that comforted young Bruce Wayne after his parents were murdered in the comics. And originally, she was just a nice old lady that, you know, was kind to Bruce Wayne that night, and he just had pleasant memories of her. But, you know, these things get expanded upon as the years go on, and eventually she became more like a surrogate mother to Bruce, who actually, like, figured out that he was Batman, and, you know, they added a lot to it. But yeah, even though I don't remember a whole lot about this one, it's starting to come back to me. And this was one that I wound up really enjoying, even if there weren't any supervillains on it. Probably helps that it has some comic book pedigree. Jerry Conway wrote a lot of Batman comics in the 80s. In the time period in between the Englehart Rogers run and the Frank Miller run, he was probably like the main Batman writer. The thing that he's probably most famous for, as far as Batman goes, is he was the guy that created Jason Todd. Although Jason Todd will wind up becoming like a completely different character from what he originally was. If you guys like think about Jason Todd at all, you're probably thinking of more like you know, the post-crisis version. And he also created Killer Croc, and I believe he was the writer that brought back the original Mad Hatter, who hadn't appeared since the Golden Age. But, you know, one of my favorite things about this show, I've mentioned before, was seeing like a lot of the villains brought into it, especially ones that hadn't really been in much media besides comics beforehand. So I was always a little disappointed when it was going to be an episode without any of the major villains. But honestly, a lot of those did turn out to be really good. So this one I don't think is any exception. I got to give it to him for having the guts to do episodes where, like, you know, the villains were just ordinary gangsters or corrupt businessmen or, you know, corrupt politicians, that sort of thing. And a lot of those characters came from the comics also, like Rupert Thorne was from the comics, and Arthur Reeves was from the comics. When we get to the movie Mask of the Phantasm, he's a character in that. I've lived in Park Row for 30 years. It's my home. I'm not afraid here. I believe the name of the actress that voices Leslie Tompkins is Diana Muldaur. I think that's her name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but she was at this time, I think she'd just done a run on LA Law, which was a pretty popular show at that time. But I know her best from Star Trek, where she's played at least 3 separate Star Trek characters. She played 2 characters on the original series, because she was in Is There in Truth No Beauty was one of the episodes. and what was the other one she was in? She played a blind lady in one, and she played a you know, there was the episode where she played the blind lady, and there was the episode where she played the lady that was possessed by one of the aliens, where Kirk gives the "risk is our business" speech. But probably her most famous role on Star Trek came on Star Trek: The Next Generation, where she played Dr. Pulaski, who was the replacement Scrappy for Dr. Crusher during the season where she was gone. And the thing that Pulaski was most famous for was her kind of antagonistic relationship with Data, because, yeah, he does know. But yeah, on Star Trek: The Next Generation, they tried to kind of recreate the antagonistic back and forth between Spock and Bones, but it didn't work so well, I don't think, with Pulaski and Data, because Spock could be just as sarcastic and cranky as Bones, so he could give as good as he got as far as that goes. But Pulaski just seemed like she was bullying Data. Like I think in her first episode it is where she calls him Data, and he says Data to correct her, and she's like, "Well, what's the difference?" And he's like, "One is my name, the other is not." But yeah, the word actually is. This guy looks like Robert Mitchum, like a fat Robert Mitchum. But yeah, like the word is actually supposed to be pronounced Data, but his name is Data. So you're insane. You won't get away with it. Gags don't really work that way. I wore a mask around my face during COVID long enough to know that gags don't really work that way. But at least he covered her nose, so. So this episode is, I don't want to say it's based on necessarily, but it's definitely inspired by an issue of the comics, which actually was the issue of Detective Comics that is of my birth month. It's the issue of Detective Comics from March of 1976, and that was the issue that introduced Leslie Tompkins. And the idea is that, like, every night on the anniversary of his death, Batman comes to Crime Alley and meets with Leslie Tompkins, who at that time in the comics did not know Bruce Wayne was Batman. That came later. I said before that there's no villains from the comics in this episode, and I was definitely wrong. The villain of this episode is Gotham City itself. And the victim is Gotham City itself. Batman is trying to save Gotham City from itself. And one of the things I'm really enjoying about this episode is just kind of like the character work that's being done with the city. This is an episode about Gotham City. That's what's making it an enjoyable episode for me. And he saved both of these people, the hostage and the hostage taker. But even he's got like kind of a sympathetic backstory because he was like motivated out of desperation. There's a lot of gray morality in this episode, I'm noticing. And again, that's pretty daring for a children's cartoon from the 1990s. Leslie's whole life. There it is. There's the Wayne murder. There she is with Bruce. They had a little bit more to her backstory in this. Like I say, like she started off as such a simple character, like this nice old lady who was kind to Bruce Wayne, the night his parents were murdered. But they just keep adding more and more to it. And now, like in this, like she's got a whole backstory with Thomas Wayne, like they went to medical school together, and the blasting cat. That, of course, is a reference to Bill Finger, the true creator of Batman, and John Broome, who wrote a number of Batman comics during the Silver Age. Also was the co-creator of Hal Jordan, the Silver Age Green Lantern. Oh, and Bill Finger was the co-creator of Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, who was originally headquartered out of Gotham City, much like Batman. This is a very good episode. It's very, very noir. Kind of reminds me of the segment in Superman the movie where it's Superman's first night, and it's just kind of like Superman having to deal with like a whole bunch of stuff that keeps happening. That's kind of like this is kind of like a good sort of typical night in the life of Batman sort of episode. That's one of the things I'm enjoying about this, going back and rewatching it. You know, I think part of the reason that like I don't remember this episode very well is because it doesn't get talked about a lot. You have your episodes like Heart of Ice or Harley and Ivy or Almost Got 'Em, and those are some of the best episodes of the show. But people talk about those episodes all the time. Nobody ever talks about like Appointment in Crime Alley. But man, I'm digging this. I like that Gotham City has all these like crazy things. Like I've mentioned before how I like the blimps, but having a trolley. Batman's got all this stuff built into his Batmobile just in case he has to stop a trolley. I mean, I'm sure there's other stuff that would be useful to it, but it's the fact that he's so resourceful. That's what I've always liked about Batman as a character, is that he actually would be prepared for a situation like this. Like, maybe he doesn't think this exact scenario would happen, but the fact that he's prepared for a scenario like this, that's what makes Batman an appealing character. That's why I highly disliked that Robert Pattinson movie as much as I did. Because to me, it just missed the point of Batman entirely. He wasn't prepared for anything. He wasn't clever enough to figure anything out. I mean, I grew up with the Adam West version of Batman, and that was kind of the joke of that version of Batman, was that a lot of the humor was supposed to derive from how he was like just overly prepared for every possible situation. That's the character to me. That's what Batman is. Hmm. I like that he knows like all the thugs by name. That's a very Bronze Age sort of thing. Batman keeps up with all this stuff. like obviously, Jerry Conway being a writer of Bronze Age Batman comics, uh, would have a lot to do with this, but it feels like it could have been a Batman comic from the 1980s.
Don't worry about me. They're blowing up the old SRM hotel. You've got to get the people out.
Without a word, just turns and leaves.
It's time we decide where we stand. Are we for progress or against? For the future, for the past? For the weak or for the strong?
Oh, that's a great shot. Oh yeah, and Batman knows how to deactivate bombs in this version, which is a helpful skill for him to have. He also speaks Spanish. Okay, so that's a very 1930s looking photographer. Oh man. He gets around fast, that photographer.
It's a sad fact, but you have to expect violence. These people don't value human life like we do. Nobody does.
Snap.
All your punks managed to destroy completely that building. Once they confess, I'm shocked to learn that arson was a public. Thank heaven that criminals responsible. But Mr. Daggett, you told us to officer. I believe your duty is clear. Excuse.
Daggett won't escape the law, Fred. There's nothing you can do now. And besides, you have an appointment.
Yeah. Probably the most realistic thing about this episode.
Good people live here once.
Good people still live here. That's a nice little callback to the 1989 movie. Oh. She'll never stop holding him, and he'll never stop being that little boy. Man, that was a really good episode. That's an episode I think that doesn't get talked about enough going back and watching it. And it's a shame that I remembered so little about it, because it's definitely an episode worth remembering. This is an episode that like people should definitely go back and revisit this one. I kind of feel like this is a lot of what makes this show work really well. So got a lot of good drama to it, a lot of good superhero type action adventure. Don't sleep on this one just because it doesn't have any of the big supervillains in it. It doesn't really need any of the big supervillains. Like I said, the real villain of this city is Gotham City itself. Or this episode is Gotham City itself. The real victim of this episode is Gotham City itself. The main character of this story is Gotham City. And it's been said about Gotham City that Gotham City was a machine that built Batman. And I don't think any episode really showed that as much as this one. So we had Ed Asner as Roland Daggett. We had Diana Muldaur as Leslie Tompkins. Bob Ridgely as Madman. So if that voice sounded familiar to you, that's why he was Thundar the Barbarian. And on the Filmation cartoons, he was Tarzan and Flash Gordon. Jeffrey Tambor was Crocker. So yeah, and I don't recognize the name David Arlander. That's not familiar to me, but he played Nitro. So anyway, that episode, that was Appointment in Crime Alley, and our next episode will be POV. So that's kind of one of those where it's like everybody kind of tells the story from their own perspective, and you know, we get to see Batman from a few different points of view. Like it's Bullock and Montoya and another rookie cop that I don't think really appears in any further episodes. But yeah, that's a pretty interesting one. But it's also another one that I don't think has any comic book villains in it. So it's kind of weird they had two of those in a row like that. You would think they would space them out a little bit more. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this one. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and all the fun YouTube stuff down below. And make sure you hit the little bell if you want to catch one of these when it goes live. If you're enjoying these watch-alongs with Batman the Animated Series, and I hope that you are, make sure that you that you do that so you don't miss any of them going forward. We will talk to you next time. Bye.